And we're going to open up this special planning and zoning meeting. As soon as we can get these people over here on the left to sit down and be quiet.
All right, guys, we're ready.
We're ready.
Some of that is too. Traffic volumes.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to open this meeting up at
We're getting
4:01.
into it already. We're already talking strategy.
Drew, is there anything you want to start us off with?
No, we're just gonna have our second comprehensive plan advisory committee meeting. Staff from Freese and Nichols is here to go through some presentation and some workshop items for you
Okay.
guys.
I guess it's all yours.
Turn it over to you,
Awesome.
Caitlin.
Well, thanks for having us back today. So you'll remember we were here in June for the first June or July.
I don't mean to interrupt you, ma'am, but this
Yeah.
is a regular meeting. Would you introduce yourself and let us know who
Sure.
you guys are?
Sure. Hello, my name is Caitlin Admeyer. I'm the project manager for Freese and Nichols, working on the comprehensive plan update. Address is 1251 Sadler Drive, San Marcos. So we were last here in July, where we had our kickoff meeting for the comprehensive plan update. And we talked a lot about, we did kind of a SWOT discussion, talked about your aspirations for Kerrville. And so now we're here to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on a few specific things. So we are going to report back to you guys on some of the things we've started working on and some of the findings that have come out of that work, including the community survey and what we've heard from that. And then we'll have a resilience discussion and activity, and then a land use discussion as well, looking at the existing land use catalyst areas in the Kerrville 2050 plan, and just kind of talking about, do those still stand? What do we want to change or not about those? So again, we started this back in June. You've seen this schedule before, so I'll just say we are still on track to look at adoption next June. So we're looking at adopting all these plans early summer next year. So first thing I wanted to go over a little bit is CDS is our subconsultant who did the previous housing study in 2018. They have now updated it as part of this process. And so some of the takeaways, we have the full document we can make available. It's about 63 pages long. So I just pulled out some of the key things that I noted that I thought were of interest that I wanted you guys to kind of hear about. So the housing study looks at about 2,000 to 2,500 demand units, and it gets into a little bit more detail about the makeup of those units, about 1,400 for sale and 725 rental. And then to note, there are 800 to 900 new single family lots already in stages of development and construction, which should satisfy the portion of that demand for the next 2 to 3 years. So just to understand kind of the demand for housing in the city. They looked at housing costs and cost burden as well, and they came up with these numbers that approximately 30% of homeowners are considered housing cost burdened, and that means they're spending more than 30% of their household income on housing. And that number jumps up to 48.5% for renters in the city. And 25% of renters are extremely housing cost burdened. So they go even deeper. They're spending significantly more than that 30% on housing. And this chart I thought was pretty telling. You can see why those housing cost burden numbers are where they are. So in the last 10 years, again, this is looking up to 2023, how the range of housing prices have really changed and fluctuated in the city of Kerrville. The median home price has increased from $224 in 2018 to $345 in 2023. Right now, there's about a 7 to 5 month inventory on the market that's considered balanced. Where a balanced market is considered 5 to 7 months. Kerrville's currently around 4. So there is more demand than there is supply, basically, is what that is saying.
Do they have in their studies from 2018 to 2023, do they come up with factors or reasoning for the increase in the median price, or do they just come up with the prices?
They go into a lot of detail about why they think that is and what they think could be done to help.
We have that?
Yeah, so we have that full report that
Okay.
I assume Drew can share that.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very it's a hefty document with a lot of information. And then this I thought was a really interesting data point that as of 2022, first-time home buyers are beginning to be priced out of entry-level home buying in the city of Kerrville. So right now, first-time home buyer in 2022, first-time home buyers purchase households with incomes under 72,000 is likely unrealistic. So not only is that, you know, maybe young professionals, but there's a lot of professions that pay under $72,000 a year, right? So teachers, first responders, things like that. So understanding what that means for the makeup of the community and their ability to purchase a home in Kerrville. Of course, there's a lot of macroeconomic factors. So this is part of that reasoning why a lot of macroeconomic factors have changed since 2018. Land, labor, materials costs, supply chain delays, inflation, rates, all of that kind of thing contributes to those affordability issues. So, you know, it's not just things that the city of Kerrville can control, unfortunately, but just being aware of where you are in some of those influences. So some of the strategies and considerations that I pulled out that I thought were interesting. We talked about some of these in the last meeting related specifically to downtown. But building regulation updates in terms of lowering lot sizes and things like that can really help allow different varieties and types of housing to come online in Kerrville that can provide lower price points. So things like duplexes and townhomes, which you have some of naturally occurring already in Kerrville, but oftentimes, especially in Texas, those kinds of types of housing there's a lot of barriers to getting them built just with how we do our zoning codes here. So looking at zoning ordinances, understanding how you might be able to get some more of those other types of housing that aren't single family but aren't apartments either. So that's what we call that missing middle. Looking at short-term rental ordinances. So, you know, a lot of your neighbors have been dealing with STRs. And so what you guys should be looking at. So there's a whole section in there about understanding how you might regulate STRs to make sure they're not impacting your housing market too much. Allowing things like duplexes, fourplexes, and ADUs. Again, those are those missing middle housing types that can provide a certain quality of life, but at a lower price point than a typical single family home on a single family lot. Pattern zoning, especially for the two small area plans that we're looking at, which is Nimitz Lake and downtown. So that's talking about looking at form of buildings rather than regulating use as much of buildings. So allowing, as long as it kind of fits the form, then residential would be allowed in these certain areas that maybe are considered historically more commercial. Small scale multifamily rental units that are currently acting as naturally occurring affordable housing, making sure there's programs in place to try to keep those and not let everything just continuously become more and more expensive. And then a few strategies around how the city can be involved in helping kind of finance and incentivize both housing development, but also improvements such as infrastructure, land, and construction to encourage preservation and lower cost housing. So again, that's just a quick overview of some of the big things that I pulled out of this longer document that we'll make available. Then something else we've been working on is your community snapshot. So this is our just look at all of the current existing frameworks that are in play in Kerrville as we endeavor on updating the rest of your plan. So we look at history, context, physical conditions, existing planning work, so what's come before us, and demographic trends and projections. So likely the thing you're most interested in are those demographic projections. So we get these from the Texas Water Development Board. They are kind of the people that do the projections for the state of Texas. And so you can see here, Kerrville is in that teal line kind of in the middle there. So you can see how you compare to the county as well as your neighbors. So Dripping Springs and Bernie are kind of on this upward trajectory, whereas the rest of both the county and Kerrville are a little bit flatter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's helpful. It allows you to kind of be more proactive about your development, not always chasing your tail. So on the left, I guess we'll start on the right. The right table here shows you your population trends. So historically, from the year 1900 to 2020, how has your population changed? And so CAGR stands for compound annual growth rate. So that is the annual growth rate based on, I guess, the decade, so the average of the decade. As you can see, there's a big spike in the 30s, and then it's been not going up nearly as much kind of in the last 50 years. So on the left side, what we do is we take the 2020 population and we look at 3 different growth scenarios: a low growth scenario of 1.5% compound annual growth rate, a medium growth rate of 2%, and then a high growth rate of 2.5%. Population projections are more of an art than they are a science, so I will start by saying that. And especially as you're looking out to the year 2050, such a long-term projection, it's going to go up and down throughout the years. Like, you might have a year that's 6%, but then the next year's 2%. And so we're talking about an average annual CAGR looking out through 25 years, right? So understanding that, looking at these 3 different growth scenarios, these are all plausible scenarios for you. We don't know which one will happen. A lot can change in 25 years, macroeconomic trends that you don't control. So it's not necessarily saying one of these is going to happen or should happen. This is just looking at different plausible scenarios that could be for the future of Kerrville. So, but somewhere between 38 and 51,000 people is probably where you're going to be looking at ending up at the 2050 horizon, which is what this plan is looking at. So then looking at some community feedback. So we had our one CPAC meeting that you guys were all at last time. We have now also had our first downtown advisory committee meeting that we had right before you guys. We had an online survey that was open through the summer for 6 weeks. We had 427 responses. That's a pretty good response rate for a city of your size. I know it sounds small, but in terms of survey turnout, that's actually pretty good. And then we have an online interactive map that was opened also in July with the community survey. So far, it has 45 contributions, but we will keep that open throughout most of the majority of this process. So through the spring, we'll keep that open and continue acquiring contributions to that map. So here is just a snippet that you can see of the maps. You can kind of just see where people are concentrating their comments, definitely concentrated in downtown for the time being. And some of the key things about trails and walkability, roads, traffic safety, and optimizing the use of Kerrville's natural assets. I think that'll really come into play when we look at that Nimitz Lake area, as well as downtown. So I pulled a few of the survey results just to kind of pique the interest. We also have a full survey results document that we can share as well. But just to give you a snapshot of some of the things that we've started to hear. So in the future, I want Kerrville to be have a variety of housing types and price ranges. Family-oriented and safe are the top 3. Family-oriented and safe are like the top 2 we see in almost every single city we work in. But that variety of housing types is really interesting to see come out ahead. We don't always see that, but that goes back to talking about that housing study and that demand for some of that missing middle product. What do you think is the most crucial issue facing Kerrville in the future? So number 1 is affordability of housing. Number 2, barely, is the water supply availability. And then number 3 is that low crime and perception of public safety. Those 3 are by far and away the top 3. So that's good to know, especially that water supply availability one. That is a concern in every city in Central Texas, but we don't always see the public being aware of it quite so much as this. Focus on housing, attracting families and starter homes at affordable price ranges, and attracting young professionals. This I thought was so interesting because this was completely separate from that housing study that CDS did. The housing study was not put out for anyone to see before they took this survey, and that starter homes at affordable price ranges came out so high. So what you're seeing in the data from CDS is also showing up here in your survey from the community. So the community is seeing these same trends. Types of retail and services that Kerrville needs more of: family entertainment. We talked about that some with the downtown advisory group as well. Is just how do you provide spaces for people that want to maybe come and hang out for a whole half day. Small local businesses, unique businesses, and fine dining. This actually mirrors very closely what we heard for the downtown specific section too, which I think just kind of highlights that when people think about retail and services, they're still pretty much thinking about downtown. And then this is a series of priorities, needs, concerns, and strengths that we used, that we created just as a summary of the longer survey responses. In all of the survey response questions, or most of them, we also have an other category where people can just write in whatever they want if they don't feel the choices we provided were adequate. And so we have a lot of write-in responses on our survey. It's a very long survey response document, and we provide those responses just raw in the document so everyone can see exactly what was written. But this is kind of our summary of all of that. So again, priorities: safety, housing, parks and trails, downtown, mobility, goods and services, jobs, and then arts, culture, and tourism are kind of the top 8, but like in that order. Needs: more activities and entertainment, especially for families, maintaining affordability, environmental conservation, focus on downtown, improving infrastructure, specifically water, drinking water and roads, and then additional mobility options and choices, specifically bike and pedestrian infrastructure. The concerns: affordable housing, and then employment opportunities and business diversity. So especially that employment opportunities one, that kind of gets into that affordable housing piece, because one piece is the price of the housing, the other piece is the wages people are making to afford housing, right? So it's kind of a two-sided coin there to address affordability. Water supply, safety, traffic, and transportation. Strengths are the natural assets, including the river, the hill country, the landscape, and outdoor recreation. So I think we'll want to do some good looks at how do we make sure we're preserving and supporting and kind of celebrating those natural assets as part of the comprehensive plan. And then the community's friendliness and small town charm. I like to have a lot of conversations about what does small town charm mean. For some people, it's something physical. It's the historic buildings, things like that. For a lot of people, it's the people and it's the community. And so how do we keep that small town charm even as a city is growing, potentially doubling in size based on those population projections? And it's about keeping people connected to each other. It's about having the community really be stewards of their city. And so how can we create a public physical realm through a comprehensive plan that really supports, kind of people staying connected to each other as neighbors? And that's really what a lot of people really mean when they say small town charm. We did a small update to the vision statement from the 2050 plan that was adopted in 2018. That was part of our charge, was right to update anything that seemed a little out of date. So one thing we did, there used to be a specific check mark around future growth and job opportunities. Since we didn't see that come up as much in what the community was telling us their vision for the future was, we kind of wrapped that up into that top piece that says, we know Kerrville's going to grow, right? We can't stop it. So as Kerrville does grow, the city will approach its future growth in a way that creates vibrant, welcoming, and inclusive communities and then supports these values. So growth used to be like its own value, and we just weren't really seeing that come out. So we made it kind of its own, we're approaching growth because we know it's happening. And then these are the values that we're going to use to approach that growth. The other thing we added, that last bullet, which was offering a variety of housing options, because that was not in the previous version. And we saw that come out so clearly in our survey results. So we added that. So those are the two changes that we made to the vision statement. Does anyone want to talk about that at all? About that vision statement, or does that feel okay? All right, not hearing any. We can come back to it if anyone has a thought later. That's fine too. So getting into our first activity. So I'm going to present the activity, and then we're going to have you guys come down and actually do the activity down in this table together. So one of the charges that we were given as part of this scope is to infuse more of a resilience lens into the comprehensive plan as it stands today. So in all of the chapters, across all of the topics, infusing more resilience. So what does that mean? Resilience is a very nebulous term. Planners talk about it a lot. But really what we're talking about, so we like to go back to the FEMA resilience definition, which is the ability to prepare for threats and hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. So let's dig into that a little more. When we're talking about hazards and threats, we have two buckets that we talk about. We talk about acute shocks. That's what most people think about when they think about FEMA, right? Is a hurricane comes or a tornado or something happens, there's an extreme immediate impact, and then FEMA comes in and helps you recover, right? Acute shocks are those things that are unexpected, they happen quickly, and they have major impacts. It doesn't necessarily just mean extreme weather, though. It can be things like grid failures or terrorism events. It can be a lot of different things that are just those acute things that happen to a community, and it creates major impacts. We also talk about chronic stressors. So these are, you might think of these as like the frog in the boiling pot kind of things. So they are things that maybe are impacting smaller number of people in the community, but at some point they get to a level where they begin having impacts on the community at large, on the whole community. So you can see the list of things, but health, chronic health issues, things like that, age, air pollution, drought. So what ends up happening is as these stressors are slowly kind of chipping away at a community, then an acute shock happens. And these stressors have kind of degraded the ability of the community to respond to a shock when it does happen, right? And so what we talk about in resiliency is both planning for those shocks, but then also trying to address some of those stressors so that when a shock does happen, the community itself is in a better position to respond and recover. So they're not trying to respond to a tornado on top of health issues and crippling debt, things like that. There's only so much a municipality can do in that realm. We recognize that you're not solving the debt crisis, right? But just talking about those things and seeing what you can do is really helpful. And so these kinds of things can be social, they can be economic, or they can be environmental. So these are just some graphic ways of explaining what I just talked about. So on the left side is maybe a community that doesn't plan for resilience. So kind of that business as usual line coming in, an acute shock happens, and the impacts are so great that they send the community across a tipping point to where the community can still recover, but there's going to be some amount of permanent loss there, whether that's physical losses, economic losses, loss of life, things like that. On the right side is what the goal is for resilience planning, which is taking that business as usual line, addressing those chronic stressors so that the business as usual line is higher, so that when an acute shock happens, the dip is less, but it also never crosses that tipping point and the community is able to recover fully. So that's kind of the idea of resilience.
Can you go back to the previous slide real quick?
Sure.
Under chronic stresses, environmental degradation, what would be a,
So that's something like maybe water quality that's getting worse,
Okay.
or loss of tree canopy, things like that.
social disparities? Is it
Mhm.
just the income levels and poverty levels?
Yeah, it's like that income gap. The wider it gets, the worse it is for the community at large. And some of these are kind of a general list of things, and we're not saying that necessarily all of these apply to Kerrville. That's the conversation we're going to have. Which ones do apply here? All right, so there's a lot of things that the city can do from like a hardening infrastructure type approach, infrastructure, stormwater, parks, housing. We can upgrade all of these physical assets of the community. We can weatherize, we can have a weatherization program to help houses be more resistant to heat waves, things like that. But what is often missing in the conversation is this idea of the community. So FEMA talks about how do they, they save lives and they fix infrastructure after the fact, but this idea of the upfront addressing stressors and making the community stronger prior to an event, that's the piece that actually happens like 365 days a year, right? It's not just during an event or right after an event. This is what we're doing all the time to try to make our community stronger so they can be better able to respond to those shocks when they do happen. All right, so what we are going to do in our activity is we're going to try to look at social and economic issues, but as well as shocks and stressors. So we're going to look at both. And some of the outcomes that we might expect from a community level resilience conversation is that the community is more self-sufficient. Neighbors are taking care of each other. The true first responders are usually neighbors, especially in an event where it's community-wide and emergency responders are having to triage who they can go help, or maybe they're cut off and can't get to a community. So we're looking at making individuals stronger, but then also neighbors and connections stronger, so that those true first responders of their neighbors can be, can be there and know what to do. So we're trying to get residents engaged and connected, and we're trying to address what we can in terms of impacts not compounding on top of those health, social, economic stressors and hardships. Again, these are the daily year-round efforts that we can do. So this is our typical process that we go through for resiliency planning. We identify threats, we identify impacts, and then players and solutions. So what we're going to ask you guys to help us do today is look at threats and impacts and understand some of those things. We can look at maps and we can look at data, we can look at floodplains, but what are some of those things that aren't maybe available so clearly, and especially in the data, that we don't know about, that we need the people of Kerrville to tell us are the issues that they're facing. So number one is we're going to have you guys come down to this table, and our first board exercise is just going to be brainstorming shocks and stressors for the community of Kerrville. So we don't have stickies. We're just going to have you guys write them straight on the board that we have. We're going to just write down shocks and stressors. But what the board looks like is this. So there's one axis of high consequence and one axis of high likelihood. And so it creates the board into 4 quadrants. And so you're going to brainstorm as a group different threats that you can think of that you think could happen in Kerrville. And we're going to rate them. Are they high consequence or low consequence? So in terms of the impacts they would have on the community. And then is it low likelihood or high likelihood? And then we'll end up with kind of a high consequence, high likelihood quadrant. That's where we really focus our efforts. So with that, would you like to come down and participate?
It's craft session, guys.
Yeah.
Bailey.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, then more people can be writing at one time.
Yeah.
All right.
No, it's not.
Yeah, she is gonna grab sticky notes, but then you guys writing them separately. Either, whichever one. Take to talk.
So you're talking about shocks and stressors particular to this community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, specifically for Kerrville, that's what we really want to hear from you guys and dial in on. What are the things that you guys are seeing or experiencing right now?
Or potential.
Yeah, either what's happening now or potential.
Should we put the slide back up that shows examples?
Yeah.
And refer to it.
Oh, someone who is though.
You know, one of the things, I don't know whether this is a shock or a stressor, but one of the things that I've noticed over the last several years, is typical things that we have to worry about.
I think we have enough.
Water supply. We have
Expecting
to
it to be
worry
knowledge.
about things like that, but I think one of the biggest stressors is the misinformation in the community.
Okay.
And we're running out of water, or we don't have enough land, we can't. And I think that's a stressor. I think that one of the ways that we can,
Yeah.
city can counteract that a little bit is do more public education, do more, on maybe a quarterly basis or a certain amount of basis. Have a town hall meeting and by having the city manager come in or have public works come in, have a town hall meeting, have people come in and ask the questions, get the fears, give them the information instead of listen to people that are running for office or people that are out there that really just complain because we don't have enough water, so we don't want people coming in. I think that's one of this city's biggest stressors, honestly, I do.
Did you write that one down?
Yeah,
Yeah.
lack of public information.
Well, I think, I think
Not-
that.
The others are
Yes,
stressors, but just the lack of information itself.
Stressor is
I think it's
misinformation.
it's both.
Lack of good
We have a lot of, I'm not calling it political unrest, but we have some factions in the city that are real chicken little as sky falling. And they put out a lot of misinformation, whether it be in a letter to the editor, or it be an ad or something about what we don't have or what we're doing wrong. And a lot of it has to do with water. And a lot of it has to do with growth. And I think that those are stressors, trust me. Everyone knows those are stressors for people who live in Kerrville, just
So-
like they are in most places. But
So that we're gonna call high likelihood because it's already happening,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And what level of consequence or impact do you think?
Mike, what you say is 100% true. But, everybody with $100 and a computer can load that stuff up and do fake news all the time, anytime they want to. It seems like maybe, and, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, is that that's not something that we can really do something about because you cannot educate the public, period.
Well, what you
It's just
can,
not
I don't
gonna
disagree
come
with you, John, but what you can do is you're not gonna convince everyone, but that's a stressor, that's a high, it's happening. And I think the city could do a better job in speaking to the people that live here. And providing information, this is where we stand, this is what we're doing. Could be an issue, but we're planning for this in a more public.
Okay, so what you're saying is just because they're not gonna read it, we're gonna publish it anyway.
I'm not, I think publishing is one thing. I think, occasionally just, put a notice out, town hall meeting, you want to come and ask us questions. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about our water supply. We're going to talk about how we manage and deal with growth. Because, a lot of people think that, you can stop growth. Well, you can. you have to manage it. Looks like what they said. That's just one of my, there's other things. There's other,
Okay.
what I think are stressors in the city, but I think in my experience over the last 8 to 10 years, that's a big stressor in Kerrville. People,
That's a-
So
That
is
was a
the,
big
it's valid.
topic of the APA conference we were all just at last
is,
week.
is the
actually.
consequence of that then that growth gets stymied, or just that it because the public gets involved and so much to say that's conflicting that
I think, I don't think, I don't think it stymies growth as much as it does, is it creates a lot of animosity.
Yeah, I would
You know,
say
in the
animosity,
community.
fear.
I mean, we want this to be a great community. People take care of people, and if we educate people a little bit better or give them access, and you're right. I mean, anybody can write a letter, they can pull up whatever. But I think if the city could do a better job of providing information and not just saying we're doing all we need to do, but offering a platform. Anybody can come in anytime, call Public Works Director, come in, he'll sit down with you anytime, and explain what the city's doing about water. But in a public forum where, you know, where you get to more people and you get the information out. And I agree with you about, you know, anybody can say whatever they want
Well,
to say.
that's not a good reason to not try.
But it's the city's responsibility to, you know, to try to ensure people that live here, ensure people that are, you know, I read letters all the time about, you know, we gotta protect our water, like the city's not doing anything about it. We have to stop growth. You know, we're promoting all this growth. And I just think we could do a better job of, which is a solution to some of this stress.
Yeah.
Okay.
My opinion.
What other
That's one thing.
Yeah.
Well, how about businesses in the city, and the situation that's happening in some Texas cities right now with the E. coli?
Mm.
We don't know if it's bad heat coming in, we don't know if it's improper hand cleaning treatments, but that's a potential that could happen anywhere, anytime. And businesses need to work with the city and do restaurant training, how to do this.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's a good one. Because that could have an impact.
where
on
would you
people.
put that on the spectrum? Is that low likelihood? Obviously, that's high consequence if it's public health related, but is it, how often are y'all seeing that?
I don't know that it's a huge issue.
It's high consequence, but.
Yeah.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
but I don't know that we've seen much of it.
As long as it's not happening, not a problem.
No, no, I'm not
Right.
saying that. I'm not saying that.
All right. What else? Let's just start throwing things on. Let's try to get a bunch
Yeah,
of them here.
I'll write them down, but y'all can write them down too as you're thinking of them. We don't want an idea to
Mhm.
flip past.
Well, I think a huge stressor is what we saw over and over is the ability to buy a home. It's we desperately want younger couples, young people to come, but they can't afford to. They can't. I mean, I'm seeing this personally with a daughter that recently moved home, and they're both working, and they can't afford to buy a home. And
Are you charging them a high rent?
I am actually. No. But I mean that
It's
that-
huge, it's huge.
we're hearing it over, and we've been hearing it for years, you know. And so trying to figure out, and unfortunately, we have shot down several opportunities to get somewhat affordable. I won't even say affordable, but somewhat affordable housing because people didn't want it next to them. You know, we're going to have to get past that.
It's a big problem.
You know, we're going to have to get past that. I think that's a huge issue. Something else I'm hearing over and over, and obviously it's, you can tell where I'm at in my life right now, but is childcare, affordable childcare is a massive issue.
That's really right.
It is a huge issue in this town, and we've got so many, the lack of it. I mean, people are paying their entire paycheck to have somebody watch their children. And I don't know if there's a way, I know I talked to somebody recently, they live in DC, and they have basically a program that helps subsidize childcare up through kindergarten. And I don't know how they go about doing that exactly, but that's one of the reasons they're staying there and not moving here until their child is 5 is because they have free childcare.
If we gotten ourselves in a position, this is a question, where you can't use municipal or federal or state tax funds, you can't send it over here to an existing, to the church that does the daycare. Is that, can't do that or can? I mean, we have the
Well, even the,
vehicles to
We have,
solve.
we have EIC money, but I don't know that we're, you know, it's not a quality of life or an infrastructure, but you're right. I mean, I'm wondering if there's not some state program that could be applied for to help, you know.
I mean, you have, the vehicle is, it's right here. And I don't know how you engage it. You know, I'm gonna just use one example, and it's not where I go to church, but like First United Methodist Church, you know, they got stuff going on all the time.
Yeah.
And they could expand and incorporate childcare, whether they go to church or not, or whatever.
That's how,
Might need some more money, but can the city?
well,
participate?
I don't,
tax dollars.
I was gonna, what?
The city tax dollars can. EIC has talked about it. It's part of the strategic plan for the KEDC board is childcare, but how to tackle that issue. There's a group
That's all.
that's together. Julie Barron's our finance director, and Katie over at KEDC. They're working on that, but they haven't found silver bullets.
I mean, that's a, you know, we have so many churches in this community. The first, when my wife and I got married, lived in Miami, the reason why we got to the church that our kids grew up in was daycare before we were moved to the church. The other side of that is, and I'm not a child care expert, but there are a lot of liabilities involved
A
with
ton.
child care.
Yes, I have worked for them, and there's a lot of
Licensing.
layers.
Licensing expenses.
Yes.
And,
Building expenses.
Okay, so where do you kill the lawyers?
Hey, I married one of those. Let's
One of the bigger,
tread lightly.
one of the bigger expenses is setting up a building and designing it to meet the
Right.
occupancy regulations,
Right.
because you have to have an exterior door on
Correct.
each room and all that. It's a lot of
Yeah.
costs.
You have to have security.
Outdoor
secure
fencing,
yards
all of that
and
comes
stuff
into
like
play.
that. But it is something that could be,
Yeah, it's
Well,
definitely
but
something.
those two issues right there, the housing and the childcare, they both fold back into getting the younger people to coming to town. Those two right there are massive issues for
All
that
that aging
for that-
population.
age group,
yeah, that's probably true.
which is one of our target groups
Yeah.
that we've talked
Yeah, it's
about.
Top one.
It's the top one, and without that, we're not going to get that.
Something else for the future, for those, I guess, too small to handle at this time, public transportation. As people age, they can't drive, they need to get around, city expands, it's hard to get across.
Well, I think that all these things tie into why you see in your statistics the slower growth is because, number one, young people can't afford to live here. We do have an aging population, but they're not being replaced by younger generations because, number one, they can't. Yeah, you know, our school district will tell you that he loses hundreds of teachers a year because they can't afford to live here. Or, you know, police officers come in here and they train and become really good, then they go someplace else because they can't afford to live here. So that really is a huge stressor for this city.
And all three of those things that you've just talked about are kind of the overall affordability picture, right?
Yeah.
Like if childcare was more affordable, then
Yeah.
people could afford more housing. If
Right.
there were more affordable options for transportation, they could afford more housing.
And
It's
it's
all
right.
part of the big picture.
The big
right?
picture.
To get to jobs.
The city does
They get better
a pretty
jobs.
decent. The city does a pretty decent job of trying to, you know, help housing development. Our biggest problem is we have very expensive land. Number one, number two, a lot of our land is not conducive for single family home development. The city does a lot of incentives, but there again, the city gets beat to death because they keep saying you're giving away this, you're giving away that. But if you don't do that, you know, builders can't build, and you can't have $300,000 homes. So,
We can ask about jobs. I mean, we can look at the data and we've got it in our snapshot. You know, the employment sectors in Kerrville. But I mean, where do people generally work who live here? Number one, and are the people who are moving here? I mean, are they from the area and they're kind of getting priced out of, you know, Austin or San Antonio,
People that work
hybrid
here,
work, things
People
like
that
that.
work here live in Bandera.
well, they'll live in Bernie or someplace like that because there's a lot. But I
So they
think
live in Bernie and
I
live here.
think that you've got the hospitals at Peterson Regional Medical Center expanding, hiring all the time. You got the state hospital right now that just added 80 beds, which is 400 positions, and they can't find anybody because they have no place to live. You got your school district. You know, a lot of people that are coming here are working for the school district, working for the hospital, working for the state hospital, maybe working at the VA hospital. The big employers is where I would say our jobs are.
A job is a house, it's a grocery box.
Sure.
Not a job, but
No.
we don't have the house.
But they don't live
We
here.
don't have that.
Yeah, they live somewhere else.
They're
in
paying
Kirk County or
admirable
Bandera.
taxes in Bandera County.
Well, and then again, we're in the process right now, probably over the next year or so, to increase our apartment supply substantially.
But that's needed for
Two projects.
drive-through restaurants. They're
Yeah.
have to be closed because we don't want to work there. People don't
That's
want to
gonna
drive
help
to San
us
Antonio
with-
for minimum wage.
Correct. And people can rent an apartment they can rent an apartment here if there was an apartment.
Yeah.
Most of the
There-
apartments that are here are full.
A lot of them are mortgages in other towns cost, you know, just for one bedroom.
Greg Schreck checked recently he called every single apartment complex and there was a 3-year waiting list. Every single one.
And that's to pay $1,400.
And that's
for a three-bedroom
to pay over what they can.
Yeah, they don't build 3 bedrooms very often.
Yeah.
No, they're not gonna build 3. They're too expensive. But we've got an apartment project coming up next year, the Bluewood apartment. You're supposed to have one coming up out there on City Baker South, which has been approved and everything for a long time, and I don't know why that is stalled. I don't, but I mean, you know, the housing affordability.
Housing availability.
Yeah,
Because I would have thought with housing prices going up, you would be seeing folks who are moving here, but maybe they have a job near La Cantera, or they have a job in Bernie.
I don't think we see that. I think it's just the opposite. I
They're
think
going
we
the
have
other way.
people that are working here that live in Bernie or maybe, you know, live someplace else because number one, it's available and maybe a little bit more expensive if it was here. But I know, you know, there's quite a few doctors and quite a few
That's
police
right.
officers that live in the Bernie area.
Yeah.
Teachers.
And their whole office staff. You know, you go to one doctor's office, old people go to doctors a lot, you'll find that out. And you visit with them, and the whole staff lives in San Antonio or Bernie or something, you know, so they're all coming in a van to be a doctor.
Okay, yeah, they're not remote workers, so.
No, they work here. They just live, and not, it's not by choice. It's because there's nothing here.
Yeah.
Well, those two same issues are also affecting, not just here, just in our surrounding area. Also, you know, restaurants are struggling, small businesses are struggling.
Employees.
They cannot keep employees because they cannot afford to live here. They can't afford to work just above minimum wage and have childcare and pay for a house.
The housing thing is one of several, but in some of the other areas, Kerrville has done such, not just a good job, but a stellar job, an out there job, the ASR with water. That the utilities talking about natural gas fired power plants.
Forward thinking, like you guys did years ago with that reuse pond. I mean, that reuse pond is an unbelievable asset for the city.
All those things, but housing?
Well, housing is, you know, it's expensive to build, it's expensive to buy the land, it's expensive to develop the land. And it's not getting any cheaper, and that's a problem. It's just, I don't think it's just a problem for us, that's a problem for a lot of communities.
It's the main issue, water access for development, or is it
No,
topography?
no,
or
we have water access, we have infrastructure. City does a really good job of, you know, having a water plan. It just the problem is, and it's over the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. The problem is, 8 or 9 years ago, you could buy a piece of land much cheaper than you can today, and all of the land that's really the flat land, which is really like the first Lennar project and some of the other little projects, is gone. And now a lot of the rest of the land is either expensive or it's geographically undesirable or too expensive to build on. That's a problem we have. I'm not sure why we haven't seen any residential development a little north towards Center Point. There's a lot of land up there, and maybe they don't want to sell it. There's no, it's not in the city. But
That's why, Mike, it's the density,
yeah, the density.
because the county, they won't allow it.
Say that again?
The county density won't allow for the kind of thing that like a Lennar or a KBO Homes or somebody like that.
They don't want it. People up there
They
don't
won't
want
allow for it.
The county has that kind of zoning authority?
Because
now?
of septic.
Yeah, between septic and the well.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
it. So basically, it really is. It's water.
Yeah,
Because the county doesn't have any ordinances. They can't.
so many
They
feet
can't
from the
zone
well to the
anything.
septic and so many acres and yada, yada.
Usually groundwater
1 or 2
district,
acres.
10-acre minimum.
And then you
wow.
got a Harville County Commissioner's Court that doesn't want anything.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
Is that camera?
We love our friends across the street.
These have just been kind of scattershot. If there's any that y'all think need to move up or down or side to side. I'm just trying to capture everything that y'all are saying.
I think you've done a good job. I mean,
You know, I had a long conversation with my retired school teacher wife about this meeting. This is what she said. Make sure they make a place for Target and Jason's Deli, if you can do that. Well,
That Target won't die.
You can't staff it.
We
Yeah.
have a place on Target. They're not
There's
coming here until
nobody
the
to work it.
demographics meeting. It's not people think, well, we have a Target, well, we have this. They're not coming here unless the demographics.
I was
Years
just
ago.
kidding, Mike.
I'd love to have an Olive Garden here. I actually talked to Olive Gardens in San Antonio. They said, we'd love to be out there, but the demographics just don't justify it.
Is it an income thing or population?
It's demographic, it's income, it's, pricing, it's will we have enough people come to Olive Garden to keep the doors open? It's just not here.
So this is a smaller issue and I don't know where we would put it, but it is something I've literally heard my entire life living here, is we just don't want Kerrville to change.
Oh, that's exactly right.
We don't want it to grow. And the irony is, I heard it a year ago from somebody that moved in on my street. And they're like, well, we just want it to stay the same. And I'm like, well, where did you come
Yeah,
from?
we got you, you got here.
Well, we just moved here from Houston. I'm like, so let me understand this. You just moved here. But you don't want it to change, as the people that were before you said you don't want it to change.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But it literally has been a mindset my entire
It
life.
still is. It's still, you
Living
see letters in the paper. I saw a letter in the paper the other day about growth and development. We've been here for 3 years. We love this place and we really don't want to see it grow anymore.
We don't want to see it
Well,
change.
who let you in?
Right.
We call it the pulling up the drawbridge effect.
Yes, it is. Exactly right.
Yes.
Delane, you're gonna maybe need to take Mike out back. This is the same thing we did in the Broncos 20 years ago. Guantanamo, no more.
So by the way, if you have any issues, we have city government right here.
Wait, she's pretty tired of this moment.
So what do you do about that? I mean, you can't change.
Well, and that therein lies the question. My husband and I talk about this all the time because it really is a mindset. And I am a big, a lot of problems are solved by relationship kind of person. So every time that comes up with me, I have the conversation. I say what I just said, but you just came here, and the people before you didn't want you to come here. So what is it you don't want to change? And I So there's a lot of one-on-one, I think that needs to happen. But as a bigger picture, how do you change that mindset as a city?
Yeah, I mean, part of the answer is what people love about Texas and is also what they don't love about Texas, which is you can't control things like that. You can't tell people not to build on their land. You
Yeah.
just don't have those kinds of tools in Texas. Other places do have them. Growth control measures are a thing, not in Texas. And so the conversation generally just has to be, it is going to really, we can't tell them
Right.
what to do,
We have to
just
manage
like
it.
we can't tell you what to do, but we also can't tell them what to do, right? And so through things like a comprehensive plan, you can try to guide that growth so that it happens in a way that is bringing benefits that the community wants to see. And so it's growth, but it's growth with good things. It's not just for the developers and for the new people. It's also for the people who are here. And how do we try to get those benefits for the existing community to come along with that growth as well?
So what you do is you look at them and you say, how the hell did you get here?
Maybe part of the answer is going right back to where Mike started. It's having some sort of vehicle with regularity that explains what a job means, you know, or how much water we have, or if you know, and just education. Because
Well, and the reality is, without growth, a city dies.
That's right. Without
We-
growth, you know
and-
what you are? You're center point.
People don't understand.
Not that there's anything wrong with center point, but without growth, you're center point. They don't
Well,
want
and
growth.
one of the things, and I think it's a stressor also, and because I've heard this pretty frequently, is Kerrville, for the most part, for most of my life of being here, has been pretty conservative. And as it's continued to grow, that is shifting a little bit. And people are having conversations they've never had to have before, or they are having viewpoints they have never heard before, or they have lifestyles they've never considered before. And I think that the more that growth happens, by nature of the game, that's going to happen more and more.
Diversity.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's part of what people are pushing against. Is we have a culture in Kerrville that is ingrained here, and I think it's starting to become a stressor. You're hearing conversations more and more, and I hear people being a little bit more combatant in the way they're approaching those conversations.
Yeah.
It's not really a conversation. They're not responding, they're reacting.
You make a good point, John, about growth. I think the two biggest stressors is the concept of water conservation and the concept of growth in Kerrville. And I think you can do the same thing, you know, occasionally with a town hall meeting or some type of information seminar.
The conflict between growth.
So you can explain to, you know, people that, well, I don't know why we need to grow or blah, blah, blah. You know, we have to manage it. We can't stop it.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. Just like we're talking about water information. That's the two biggest things that you hear about as far as stressors, not problems. Water and growth.
I think a big stressor, especially we're gonna grow double maybe by 2050,
Mhm.
is gonna be the traffic.
That was the next words on my mouth.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
can't-
already
it takes
it's
me
high.
3
It's big
lights
for
to
me
get
now,
through
'cause I
downtown.
grew up here,
Mhm.
but how much has grown since then? I mean, we throw it in Holsworth and, you know, some other highways, Thompson Drive goes around. That all helps, but I'm not even sure what they could do about it though, since there's nowhere else to put roads.
No, Greg and I were talking,
One of the issues is access across the river. I mean,
Yeah.
there's only so many ways to get from one side of the river to the other. So
One of them's newer in the last, I'll say,
connections.
10 years, 5, 10
Well,
years.
there's three main
Yeah.
ways, you know. But
that's 3 more than New Braunfels has.
well, there's one, right?
I-35, that's it.
I did want to ask too about flooding specifically. What are you guys seeing when there's big storms in terms of like localized flooding? Or is it not that?
We don't
The
really
park.
have.
The park.
Let's say the park floods.
It's probably the biggest, then you have the low water bridge going, bring the crossing bridge. Besides that, we don't really have, the creeks come up,
If it gets up here, animals are coming,
Yeah.
2 by 2
Yeah.
to an arc. So-
I would say
Your
the
topography.
bigger concern, at least from my perspective, is it hasn't really been the flooding. It's been whenever we get the ice storms, which doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
But for instance, in 2021,
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking about whenever you were talking about these stressors and these shocks. It's like, oh, February 21 or whatever, whenever
Correct.
power grid shuts down, it really was neighbors helping each other out. But with our topography, there are so many hills that people can't get down or can't get up.
Can't get out of your neighborhood.
You're isolated.
Trace at the top.
Yeah, you're stuck there, and so that's been, I think, a bigger issue than
My wife had to be at Cape Up,
than the flooding.
and I had to take her in my truck. I had it in 4 low, and I'm still sliding because we
I
have
did the
hills
same
all
thing in my
around.
truck, yeah.
And that lack of being cut off kind of from a roadway perspective, that could be an issue in a lot of different situations. Like ice storms is one, but also, if there was a sinkhole that cut off that roadway and that's the only way in and out of the neighborhood, then all those people are cut off, things like that.
Y'all think heated streets are in our budget? They come
Get blow dryer.
Comanche has heated that road.
Kerrville must have an awesome
City of-
ordinance against building, not just a floodway, but in the floodplain. That's the problem we saw.
Yeah, we have a pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Floodway
Yeah.
and retention areas. Protect. That's, like I said, that's only a couple of times in the last 30 years can I remember we've had enough rain to really, like you've had rain where the water was just up under the City Baker Bridge. Never closed the highway, but, like 173 was closed because of Turtle Creek. Yeah, that's very, very rare.
A month ago, 2 months ago,
Yeah,
Ingram flooded.
the school.
The school flooded. We
Maybe a
as far as I know, didn't have any significant issues here. So that's an access issue, but a few private properties with buildings, are they typically pretty vulnerable, or are they mostly elevated?
There's a couple in the
On the
county.
north side, most of them.
Yeah, I was gonna
There's a couple
say it
in the
would
county
be out,
that
yeah.
would be, if Turtle Creek it would not be able to get out, but it's very, very rare.
That's more of an infrastructure issue.
Well, following up on yours, I actually had that on my list also, just although it rarely happens here, that ice storm, I mean, it significantly affected a lot of people. There were there were a lot of people without electricity and without water because their pipes were frozen for what was it, 4 or 5 days, some of them.
On that piece, actually, so I'm gonna move us on to the next piece
Okay.
of this, which is taking, and a lot of this you guys have been just talking about, we've just been noting, kind of as you guys have been talking. But the next step is looking at taking a threat, identifying impacts and losses, needs, and potential stakeholders and players and solutions. So I would actually love to dig into the ice storm and what you guys saw during the ice storm here. And kind of talk about what were the impacts and losses, what were the needs that arose, and kind of who was involved. So I think those ice storms, they were a specific shock, but I think some of the impacts and needs and things that happened during that are a little bit more universal beyond just an ice storm. I think it showed a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of different systems in our cities. So if we could unpack ice storm.
Yeah, so for me, I'm a banker, and so it's not uncommon that we have a federal holiday here or there because we like taking a day off. But whenever it's unexpected and you're closed for consecutive days, and you take people away from actual physical access to their money or their doing their transactions, and we had some customers that were still able to open up and operate, but they don't have access to cash that they might need for their restaurant or whatever it is. You have a lot of
impacts in that regard, and that's just from my perspective, in terms of what I saw via my work.
No, I think you brought it up. I mean, I think that power was out, we were without power for, I think, just about, maybe not quite 24 hours. I don't remember if we were without water very long, if we even were without water, but some people were.
Yeah.
Some people were without water.
I think there's water tanks.
Yes.
Natural houses.
Yeah, their pumps were
There were
freezing.
some people that were in areas, I mean, you couldn't have a four-wheel drive pickup with low, you weren't going down the hill and matching trees. There were some areas, and I do think the city was able, I mean, I think the city dealt with it pretty good. I think if people needed help, they could get help. I don't, you had
Dump trucks full of sand,
Yeah.
spreaders, everywhere, but to me, what had the biggest impact, ice storm, right? All those things happen, is not having power.
not having power, right?
Which there's a lot of different hazards, a lot of those different shocks can result in power outages, right?
Especially when it's, when it, for 5 days in a row, it never gets above 20 degrees. You have older people in homes,
Well,
we were
say-
forced to-
If
Medical
you didn't
equipment
have,
Fire-
wasn't
fireplace.
working. They didn't
Yeah.
have food. I
if you
mean,
didn't have to depend on the grid,
Right.
then that would, lessen that
Mhm.
problem.
So
Because if you can turn the power on and get your heat in your house, your pipes might not freeze. It just,
Right.
it goes on and on and on and on. It's just,
Yeah.
you need the power.
And that kind of further highlights the disparity in the level of risk moving forward, because folks with the means could buy a backup generator.
I have one now.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
But not everybody can do that.
A propane generator from Generac, yeah, it's that's,
Right.
but not everybody gets to do that.
Yeah.
I think the city does a pretty good job of being prepared for emergencies like that. I think that emergency response people, the fire department, I know the fire department, and police department were out, and they were
Yeah, they were doing everything.
doing everything, and I think they did a pretty good job. of anyone
But you
that
need to
really-
be able to flip on the light
Well-
switch and turn on the heater. So what can we,
That's the
well,
grid.
something that I was
what are these?
when I
do?
was just thinking through this, one of the players that was a huge player during that time were Neighbors Helping Neighbors.
Mhm.
I mean, I had people staying in my vacation rentals because I had water and power. Remarkably, my house didn't, but my cottages did, that their pumps weren't working. So I gave them my house to come stay in. There was one family that was there for over a week because their entire pump system went down. But where I'm going with that, the needs I started seeing pop up were neighbors that couldn't cook food. They had no water. Their HEB was, apocalyptic. So although we had great neighbors helping people as much as they could, to maybe have some type of emergency water system that we could get it here, almost like a local FEMA, I don't know. Or like a Meals on Wheels that we have for our elderly, to make sure that somehow we can emergency deploy if that happened again. Or generators for people that had, oxygen and medical equipment they couldn't get working, which fell into my dad's realm, Anyway,
One of
There
the,
are a few
it's a
things
good
I
idea.
thought
One
of.
of the things that maybe the city could look at is, and I'm sure that they would have an idea about this, from what we went through a couple of years ago, is identify areas that are very vulnerable. If there's an ice storm, if there's a power outage, where they need to immediately be there, maybe with a generator, maybe with blankets, maybe with water, whatever, because there are areas that would be more vulnerable than others.
well, any area that's pier and beam homes, they're going down. So,
Be prepared, yeah.
So you're kind of getting into an assessment of risk, which
Yes.
properties are most vulnerable based on topography or
Age.
access points, age of the home, construction.
The age of the people living in the home.
All right, well, and Matt, I know we've got about 20 minutes left, so I want to move on to our last.
Play long.
I know, it's a really fun
There are no
exercise.
stick men on this thing, and
I'm
somebody
not good
said.
at
Sometimes we do this, sometimes we take 2 whole days to do this.
Yeah.
Each exercise is like a whole half day workshop. Like, we can
Well, you-
get really into
You
this.
can go at 6 o'clock, John, they're gonna be at the Arcadia.
Yeah.
In fact, Mac, you should be there.
Are
I
we
should
doing
be
this
there.
at the Arcadia?
Planning zone.
Not this exact one. We have a more higher level questions for the public.
Dinner.
What are you serving for
Meat
dinner?
and cheese.
Meat and cheese plates.
And cookies.
Good.
Cookies. Lemon bars. All right, with that, you guys can go back up to your seats because we have some things that we want to talk about in the last plan. All right. Well, that was good discussion. I think that gave us a lot of things to kind of talk about and think about. Just understanding what you guys are thinking about and concerned about, and what are some things that maybe went well in past events, and maybe things that we're missing in past events. So that's super helpful. All right. So
Speaking of education, this is a fun graphic that we like to use to talk to communities.
Don't leave, Delane.
So tax base is what keeps the city government running, right? We all know that. Without income taxes, Texas cities are in a specifically harder position and rely solely on property and sales tax. Residents technically can pass bonds to fund specific priorities. Those are more or less of interest to a lot of communities. Actually, right now, Travis County is passing a child care bond. So, is trying to pass a child care bond. We'll see, right, in a couple weeks. So I thought that was interesting when you were talking about that. But the world we live in is really this Venn diagram on the right. People want high services, they want low density most of the time, and they want low taxes. Problem is you can't have all 3 of those things. You have to pay for high level of services, and that either means spreading that out over more people in order to keep taxes low, or if you have low density, more people are paying more money. Each person is paying more money. If you want to keep low taxes and low density, that's fine, but the city's not going to be able to provide very good services. If you want to keep low taxes and high services, that's fine too, but you can't have less people paying into the pot, right? So basically you can have 2 of the 3, but not all 3. So that's really the world we live in when we talk about land use issues, is understanding that kind of world. So this is just a satellite image of the city of Kerrville. This is a map of your existing land uses. So these are actually looking at what exists there today and the use that is there. So you can kind of see the darker purple is the vacant land. Pink, the bright pink that you see kind of in downtown and stuff, is that neighborhood commercial, and then you've got a lot of rural residential. One thing to note on this is that the darker black line, so that's your city boundaries, right? The dashed line is your ETJ. What's important for this next conversation we're about to have is that ETJ laws have changed recently.
Say that again.
ETJ laws have recently changed with the last legislative session. The next session's about to start, so we'll see what happens. Every couple years there's kind of new ETJ laws, but the cities has less control of the ETJ than they ever have before. What we're about to look at are the catalyst sites that were identified in the 2018 plan before these new ETJ laws went into effect. A lot of them incorporate ETJ area. And so that's one conversation we want to have is, do we still consider the ETJ to be viable catalyst sites for the city? Since there's very little control and jurisdiction, unless they annex into the city, but it's all voluntary at this point. So I don't know, maybe Drew can chime in as well.
It's unanimously voluntary, isn't it, Drew?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
technically there are other ways, but it goes to a citywide election. So I don't see that happening here. Certainly not part of our policy to go try to annex land. And so we are looking at strictly voluntary annexations.
Yeah.
This is the future land use map from 2018, just kind of for reference. You see a lot of all of those those bright red areas, those are strategic catalyst areas, which that is a lot of strategic catalyst areas. Normally they're much smaller than that so that you can kind of focus your efforts. You guys were very bold in 2018. So this is the map from the previous plan. It's a little bit busy, but it's what we have at this point. So I want to definitely dig into the first three because those are the areas we're specifically looking at with our small area plans with downtown and Nimitz. But I also want to quickly touch on the others and just see, our task is to update your plan. And so we want to know, should we leave the rest of them alone? Are they good as they are? Do they still apply, or are there things we need to change? So kind of as we're going through this discussion, ask yourselves what's important about Kerrville and what of that Venn diagram, what are the trade-offs are we willing to make, and what impacts are we creating by putting certain uses in certain areas or next to each other? And if we're making these certain decisions, what are we giving up and are we okay with that? So those are just kind of the things we think about when we do land use planning. So Catalyst Area 1, this is downtown. I think this is pretty clear. I guess it's not all of downtown. Our downtown plan is the whole TERS boundary, so it's much bigger than this Catalyst area. I think this is still pretty applicable. Again, this is looking from a comprehensive plan level, right? So it's pretty high level. It's not super detailed. This idea of orienting towards the river is interesting, and I think we heard some of that in our survey. And then a strong focus on redevelopment and catalyzing a renewed public interest in the area. So I think that's part of our charge with doing that downtown plan and updating that is to look specifically at this area. So I think this one is good unless you guys see any red flags in there that you want to talk about.
Caitlin, there is one that I'd like to introduce for discussion at least.
Yeah.
The kind of southern portion of the TERS boundary is set for entertainment and mixed use. And we have not seen the trigger of redevelopment in that area that we anticipated.
Through what
with that.
area is that?
Sorry, from kind of the south edge of downtown where the circle ends, down to G Street.
Okay.
Between 1 and 9, right?
Yes, between 1 and 9. Thank you. So that's zoned mixed use following the comp plan. But what we've seen from the department side is not a lot of reinvestment in that area. So I'm wondering if the zoning and the comp plan recommendation is actually too restrictive, or if that's something we should look at more of a pattern-based zoning for that area. As a part of the extended downtown area that we were talking about. Just wanted to throw that one out there for consideration.
The dotted line demarcation northwest of 9, where is that?
Like the blue dots.
Yeah, the blue dots are
Yes,
9.
Travis, that'd be where Main Street turns into Broadway, right at Travis, and then as you get just south of that, you start A Street, B Street, down to G.
So when you say pattern zoning, what's your goal, Drew? I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But what do you foresee happening there?
So one of the things that we've heard from a few property owners is the land use in that zoning district is too restrictive. And there's not an issue with the scale of the properties. So we're not looking at joining blocks to make, super blocks for large development. Maintain the scale of that, small grid pattern that's there through that south part of the TERS district. But allowing more open land uses, as long as it fits within that framework. How much is the heavier land use is going to impact?
Can you give me some examples of?
We've had a few contractors, more of your specialty trade contractors, looking to go in that area. It is center part of town. It's got good access to all parts of growth areas in town. Most of them are still looking at everything indoors. They're not going to have, a contractor storage yard and equipment, but an indoor warehouse, supplies, indoors, and office space. But it is not allowed in that zoning district. So that's one example that we've had. Other than that, we haven't seen a lot of increasing interest in the area to turn over some of the existing buildings. We've had a few projects come in for some short-term rental and housing. But outside of those 4 or 5 examples, we just haven't seen a lot of the resurgence to that area that we were anticipating.
Is it not a zone for housing?
Multifamily housing. It does not allow single family. Caitlin, is there anything else you want to add on the pattern zoning?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah, it's basically less a regulation of use and just more a regulation of kind of form of the building, and saying as long as you fit in that form, you can be here, whether it's housing or light industrial kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, I can see that area being one of those spots that could be really good for some of that missing middle stuff that's adjacent to downtown, but not quite in downtown. And so allowing, again, it sounds like multifamily is allowed, but
Blaine, and what was it called when they were doing 50% office, 50% industrial in Miami? What do we call that? We called it some type of zoning. It was like flex space.
Flex industrial. Mm-hmm.
So maybe some type of a flex space operation would be good there, because it's it's a mixture of a substantial higher percentage of office space, but it still had warehouse space in it.
Right. So I think from our current zoning standards, that would be considered a light industrial use.
Yes, it is.
But often it's a very clean version of industrial. So.
And we heard some conversations earlier today when we were talking about downtown with some of the folks who came about like maker spaces. Those are usually considered light industrial or flex industrial, but aren't allowed because they have that industrial name on them. Right. But that could be an interesting use down there. Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay. So
Did the city come up with incentives to?
Regulating those things from a zoning standpoint is, not we like industrial or we don't like industrial. It's kind of what Drew alluded to, that some of these uses tend to have a lot of outdoor storage, or they tend to produce odors or have other negative impacts. So we kind of target regulations based on those, and any use or any user that can kind of meet those standards is generally allowed. And it's not classified so much as industrial user. It's, do you have outside storage and do you produce all these other effects?
Okay. So it sounds like there's an interest in us maybe massaging that piece down there, expanding it a little bit. Okay. Great. Did I turn this off?
David, you asked about city incentives. Is that what you were about to ask for?
Yeah, if the city's looking to develop certain types of housing or industry in an area, could there be incentives that the city could use to promote those kind of developments?
There certainly always is that ability. If it's these areas that's within downtown that you're talking about specific, there's the TERS. So that was set up to, kind of look through project by project scenarios and help build capacity. So there are options, yes, sir.
Right. So Catalyst Area 2 is just south of downtown on the other side of the river, southwest. You'll see a lot of this area is in the ETJ with that black line that kind of goes through the middle. So a lot of that striped area on the west side is all in the ETJ. It's not to say it still can't be considered a catalyst. It's just a matter of, are you actually ever going to get... Go ahead, Drew.
Like I said, the one change to that, you see the hospital just to the right of number 2. The hospital did purchase 157 acres behind them, and that has been annexed.
And they're annexing. Okay.
And so they have their master plan.
Perfect.
For that one portion. It's basically the hospital property straight back almost to the Catalyst line.
So in that case, maybe we do keep this one because we're seeing a
Yeah, if there
potential trend of annexing.
was any development, I think it would be right there off of Shepherd Reese behind the state hospital.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine they would have to annex
Mm-hmm.
to get any kind of density because the topography, it's pretty rough right in that section. So
Okay. Yeah, and you see the place types and distinctions listed here. They basically put everything in here in that last plan. So basically all your levels of residential. I think we could probably expand that to be more missing middle stuff too, because I think transitional has maybe some of that in it. So office, entertainment, mixed use, and agriculture and outdoor tourism. So this one allows for a lot of things already. I think we potentially dial in that north piece that's the old mall, or the mall that's
The
still
small,
working. The what?
the small.
Is that what you call it? That mall, just given its proximity to downtown, I think we'll probably look specifically at that site a little bit more in depth, even though it's not within our downtown boundary. I'm going to personally draw outside the lines a little bit and look at that mall site and just see how that might interact with downtown a little bit more.
Yeah, this is one of your really good opportunities to do some higher density housing that's not only beneficial because it provides direct access to jobs at Peterson and close to downtown. It's not in an area that has a high concentration of existing housing. It's a pretty commercial area and a fairly underutilized commercial area as well. Fairly low density, particularly at the mall, but with a lot of uses along the highway. And State Hospital is the other one. It's kind of the employment center. So we had that conversation about there's a lot of folks who live out of town and they commute in to work at the hospitals and other job centers. This is a good opportunity to maybe provide some housing for some of those staff members that have to take the bus into town to work.
You said all these hashed areas are not in the city?
So the hashed areas are those catalyst areas that were identified in 2018. The stuff you can kind of see the darker black line that goes through the middle.
Yes.
The stuff outside of that black line is the ETJ.
Okay, so the small
Yeah, is in the
post office and all that, that's in the city.
Yes.
Okay.
Or, sorry, that's in the city. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
the hatch kind of identified potential redevelopment or reinvestment.
That's where you can put the Target and the Jason's Deli.
Hey, you know what? There are some really interesting mixed use projects with like targets. They're not super targets. They're what I think they call them urban targets that are built into like a mixed use development. They're actually pretty cool.
I was mentioning to somebody that Kerrville might have the last Walmart that was built in the United States that wasn't along an interstate. They like going on interstates.
Yeah. All right. Then catalyst area number 3. So this is our Nimitz Lake area, right, that we're looking at for our other small area plan besides downtown. A lot of this, again, is in the ETJ, unless any of that has changed, Drew.
No, I've talked to one property owner that's open to the idea of
Okay.
denser development along Thompson.
Okay.
That's right where the number 3 is. So,
Potentially. They have a lot of floodplain.
yeah, there's floodplain there, and as you can see, the kind of the western edge of that area, the topography gets very steep,
Yeah.
and there would definitely be some water pressure considerations there.
Yeah.
So we talked about in our group access across the river. You do have the one bridge across Thompson. It doesn't have great pedestrian facilities necessarily, but is this a place where we can have another potential river crossing between Thompson and Junction Highway that provides folks on the west side access to those businesses on the north side of Nimitz Lake?
Anything's possible with money.
Yeah.
Besides that, no.
Yeah, put it on the map and figure out how to pay for it later.
Well, if you don't put it on a map, it'll never happen, that's for sure.
And you don't really have another crossing to the, I call it the east, southeast,
Where's that?
until you get pretty close to downtown.
So I was trying to figure out, well, where would there be?
There's not one in the immediate vicinity.
I don't think there is.
So it's just,
Can't get to
Yeah,
it.
it's just off the map to the right,
Francisco Lemus,
Francisco Limos, yeah.
yeah, right in front of the state hospital.
Yeah.
And then all the way down to Thompson.
that thing, surely that gets underwater once in a while, no?
It does.
Yeah. So that further cuts off the access.
So this one shows, and I realize we're getting like very close to time, so this will be the last, or we're a little bit over. So this is looking at mostly residential and then a little bit of entertainment and mixed use, specifically around the lake. So we've heard some different things come out of like the survey about Nimitz Lake, about whether it wants to be an entertainment district, whether they should have the river center, recreation. What are thoughts about this area? Okay, no tubing.
I don't think that flows enough.
yeah, it doesn't play, it doesn't
You
play.
know, sit in there.
There
Wind
was
can
a-
blow you around.
Well, the river,
Actually go upstream.
Guadalupe River Center is probably gonna happen there.
Oh, sorry, I was talking over you, sorry.
I'm sorry, the Guadalupe River Center there is probably gonna happen there.
Okay.
That's a yeah.
I don't know how far along.
They purchased the land,
Okay, they have purchased land. Okay.
and you do have a development there. The landing is there, who's somewhat developed, but I think
So there are plans.
you could see some additional growth there.
Okay.
That river center gets. And the rest of that land is
A lot of
relatively flat, but all privately owned, so.
Right, from Thompson to the river is relatively flat. It has water and sewer access. The uphill side from Thompson, for that first 600 to 1,000 feet, accessible with water and wastewater. Outside of that, you're gonna have to have another water tower at that point.
And then again, it's privately owned and it's probably price prohibitive.
Or so.
Yeah, I know it.
Isn't part of it in the floodplain, the privately owned?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of see underneath there, right along the river, that extra blue layer
Oh,
is
okay.
floodplain.
Sorry, I didn't know how to read that.
The blue is floodplain, and then the green is topography.
Okay.
Kind of see the
I
physical.
was not reading that properly.
Sorry. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, obviously, we're going to dig into all of these because we're doing small area plans for these two things. So we'll continue to dig into these throughout the process. Just wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything big right here at the outset. There are 7 more catalyst areas identified in the previous plan. We could like send those out, and if anyone has thoughts, they're further out throughout the city. But so as you can see here, so we talked about 1, 2, and 3 right there in the middle, but then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 all around the city. Again, a lot in the ETJ, but I mean, we could like send those out to you guys. You guys can just kind of take a look at them and let us know if there's anything that you really kind of disagree with on those that we need to update and change. We can just kind of do that separately and talk about that maybe at the next meeting. So, because I know we're out of time. So we have to go get ready for community engagement meeting tonight. So with that, we'll just say our website is still up and running. Our next steps is we're going to have some more focus group stakeholder meetings, and then we'll look at updating all of those topical chapters as well as that installation of sustainability and resilience additions into all of the chapters. And the next time we'll be out here, we'll be looking at late January to come have our next meeting with you guys. So if we don't see you at the engagement this evening, happy holidays, because that's where we are now. We're at that time of year. Yeah.
Everything else true?
That's all we have.
Yeah, that's what we have for today.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
35.
And you guys are, of course, welcome to go to the 6 o'clock meeting if you'd like.
Where is it?
Arcadia. Right across the street.
All right, guess I'll be there. You got food.